New restrictions for Russian energy and finance from the European Commission. Some of them may be introduced for the first time. Today in Brussels, the 19th package of sanctions was presented. The public announcement of what might be included was delayed due to consultations with the United States. Does the 19th package contain measures advocated by Donald Trump, specifically the refusal to purchase Russian oil? Radio Svoboda's correspondent in Brussels, Zoryana Stepanenko, has the details, reporting exclusively for TSN.
An EU refusal to buy Russian oil right now would, without exaggeration, be a sensation, but it is not included in the 19th package. However, it does include a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas, which is purchased by a number of EU countries. There was already a plan to completely replace it with fuel from other suppliers or sources, but the deadline was different, by the end of 2027. Now, there is an idea to accomplish this before that deadline, thus pushing Russian LNG out of here a year earlier. I should note that the previous plan had already been criticized by the EU countries most dependent on Russian fossil fuels, Hungary and Slovakia. Now that the timeline has been shortened, and moreover as part of a sanctions package that requires the approval of all EU countries, it can be assumed that they will resist. It is also proposed to add 45 Russian and foreign companies that support the Russian military-industrial complex to the blacklist, as well as another 118 ships from Russia's so-called shadow fleet. These are vessels that transport fuel in circumvention of existing restrictions. Among the proposals is also a ban on transactions with the largest energy companies, Rosneft and Gazprom Neft, and for the first time, as part of the fight against sanctions evasion, a ban on cryptocurrency transactions. The head of the European Commission insists that EU sanctions are effective and that Russia's overheated war economy, quote, is operating at its limit.
When we talk to partners who maintain contact with Russia, we hear that one of Russia's first requests is the easing of sanctions. We know that our sanctions are an effective tool of economic pressure, and we will continue to apply them until Russia sits down at the negotiating table with Ukraine to achieve a just and lasting peace.
Unlike previous packages, the 19th has several objectives at once. In addition to restricting Russia's revenues, which it uses to finance the war against Ukraine, it is also meant to demonstrate to American partners that the EU is doing its part. Donald Trump expects Europe to completely abandon Russian oil. Otherwise, he believes the game is not fair. Quote, the US president noted, if the price of raw materials drops, Russia will move toward a settlement in Ukraine. However, experts interviewed by Radio Liberty are not convinced that this yet-to-be-adopted decision will have such far-reaching consequences.
Halting the supply of Russian oil to the EU would be a good step in the right direction. But this is not enough to completely stop Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine and its funding. We need additional measures. Sanctions against natural gas have been relatively successful, and we need to strengthen them. For example, we know that Russian LNG worth billions of euros is still flowing into the EU.
The more time the European Union takes to give up fossil fuels from Russia, the more time Moscow has to find other buyers, analysts note. They do not expect that the blow to the Russian budget from the 19th package of sanctions will be devastating. The intrigue remains as to whether Hungary and Slovakia, which have increased their imports of Russian energy resources even during the full-scale war against Ukraine, will approve this round of restrictions. The Financial Times has learned that in order to make Viktor Orban more amenable to sanctions, the European Commission may unfreeze about 550 million euros from the EU fund for Hungary. Traditionally, proposals from the European Commission require a unanimous yes from all EU member states. The discussions began today. From Brussels, Zoryana Stepanenko, Marek Hajduk, Radio Liberty, especially for TSN, 1+1, Marathon, United News.
They discussed the war in Ukraine and mutual visits. Donald Trump held a conversation with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. As the US president reported on his social network, Truth Social, they made progress on many very important issues. In particular, the topics included trade, issues with fentanyl, the need to end the war between Russia and Ukraine, as well as the approval of the agreement regarding the social network TikTok. Donald Trump added that he will meet with his Chinese counterpart at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit in South Korea, and at the beginning of the new year he will visit China, while Xi Jinping will later come to America. Trump called the conversation with the Chinese leader productive. Disappointment in Putin, pressure on Russia, and assistance to Ukraine were also topics of discussion during the US president's visit to Britain. Donald Trump was given an exceptionally lavish reception against the backdrop of mass protests against the arrival of the American leader. What made the visit memorable and why the monarch mentioned Ukraine during it, TSN correspondent Kateryna Fedorchenko will tell us.
A visit covered by all the world's media, for which British police are monitoring land, air and water. Guards are diligently rehearsing ahead of their participation in the parade. The golden royal carriages are also at the ready. A visit that brought thousands of Britons out to protest and whose reaction has caused a rift in British society. Bold actions with hints of pedophilia and the arrests of those involved. All of this is part of President Trump's second state visit to the United Kingdom. During his first term, he was received by the now late Queen Elizabeth II. That visit was remembered for a series of awkward incidents, mostly on Trump's part. The American president broke protocol, for example, by walking ahead of the monarch, which drew a storm of criticism in the press. Now, neither the British media nor the public have any particular fondness for the US president. According to a poll, only 16% of Britons support him as a politician, and protocol services are already wary of tough questions from the press that may arise during public events. Under these circumstances, the royal family has to balance between the secret mission of charming Trump and explaining such a lavish reception to their subjects. A helicopter carrying the American president and the First Lady lands in Windsor. The Trumps are greeted by Crown Prince William and his wife. Soon after, the King and Queen join them. The security measures are unprecedented, especially in light of the murder of the president's ally in America.
This will involve reviewing routes, premises, residences where they are staying, inspecting any buildings overlooking these areas, lines of sight, and so on. Any possible threat.
More than 1,000 guards and cavalry with 100 horses. Carriages are involved for the American president with the British monarch and for the Queen with the US First Lady. Streets are draped with flags and there is a joint air show. The British press openly calls this visit pompous. A fly in the ointment of the royal reception are the street protests. In total, about 5,000 people turn out just for this protest. And at Windsor Castle, the place where Trump is being received, before his arrival, protesters managed to project a photograph of Trump with the late billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who was convicted of sex crimes and died in prison. The American president vehemently denies any connection with him. As a result, for this audacious protest, British police arrest 4 people. Meanwhile, a lavish banquet is being prepared in Windsor. 160 guests have been invited, and while they are gathering, the staff uses rulers to precisely arrange the expensive tableware, 5 glasses and goblets, and about a dozen pieces of cutlery for each guest. Amidst the luxurious dresses and jewelry, it's impossible not to notice the matching outfits of British Queen Camilla and Melania Trump. The bright blue and yellow dresses are very reminiscent of the Ukrainian flag, so the press is wondering whether this might be a gesture of support for our country. After all, commentators call King Charles Britain's secret diplomatic weapon. Apparently, diplomats asked the monarch, who is said to be supportive of Ukraine, for a favor: to nudge Trump toward decisive action against Russia and Putin. During a 7-minute toast, the text of which was carefully prepared by British broadcasters, Charles III openly speaks about supporting our country and makes Trump nod in response.
In 2 world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in supporting Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace.
At this banquet, Trump mostly talks about cooperation between countries. And it is coming alive again. After all, among the guests are representatives of America's tech industry and business, ready to launch multi-billion-dollar projects with the British. To charm Trump, the British royal family lavishes him with flattery. After the exquisite dinner, the guests are served a special treat: rare drinks. Port wine from 1945 in honor of Trump as the 45th President of the United States, and cognac from 1913, the very year when Donald Trump's future mother was born, on the Scottish Isle of Lewis. Another compliment for the guests. A cocktail is made especially for them, featuring American whiskey. The morning after the banquet is already a working day for the American president. At the farewell with the king, Trump pats Charles on the shoulder, breaking all protocol rules. and most likely the overly familiar behavior of the American president will remain among the few scandalous moments of the visit, since the rest, including interactions with the press, go surprisingly smoothly.
A wonderful gentleman and a wonderful king.
With the British Prime Minister, the American president discusses tariffs, signs agreements, and talks about ending the war in Ukraine. Already in front of the press, Keir Starmer publicly declares the need to decisively increase pressure on Putin so that he agrees to peace. The US president admits, ending the war has turned out to be more difficult than he expected.
One thing that I thought would be the easiest in the world because of my relationship with President Putin, but he let me down. He really let me down.
Trump states that he hopes to have good news on this topic soon, without specifying what he meant. And he insists, the main way to force Russia to make peace is to stop buying its oil. This accusation is directed particularly at Europe and to lower oil prices. Then Putin will have to agree to negotiations. The British press notes that Prime Minister Starmer apparently failed to persuade Trump to impose sanctions against Russia himself. Donald Trump is leaving Britain completely satisfied. He became the first US president to visit the country twice on a state visit. Kateryna Fedorchenko, Oksana Tkachenko, TSN 1+1, Marathon, United News.
But was Donald Trump himself satisfied? How is the visit to London and the royal honors being commented on in the United States? We'll ask our own correspondent in the United States, Olga Koshelenko, about this. She is in direct contact with us. Olga, congratulations. So what mood did Trump return home in?
Oh, hello. Donald Trump enjoyed his visit to the United Kingdom immensely. The day before, returning on Air Force One, he told journalists that he was received at the highest level with great respect for him and for America. And that personally, for example, he saw more paintings and sculptures than he had seen in his entire life before. And the fact that he enjoys this royal protocol with honors, carriage rides, and so on, the President of the United States had not hidden before. He said that the British are probably the best at this. And besides that, one of his earliest childhood memories is connected to the British royal family, which he describes in his memoirs, The Art of the Deal. His mother, who was Scottish by origin, was watching the coronation of Elizabeth II on television in June 1953. And his father told her, turn it off, because all these royals are just a bunch of fake actors. But young Donald was captivated by this royal splendor even back then, and since then, he has never changed his mind. Later, he communicated with Charles when he was still a prince. And after his divorce from Princess Diana, as her biographer Selena Scott writes, Trump showered the princess with numerous signs of attention and, for example, sent her flowers, considering, according to Scott, Diana as his potential trophy wife. Such are the family stories. And moreover, in the United States, they really emphasize that this is the second state visit to the monarch. And for Trump, they made an exception because they never actually do two state visits, even if the president is serving a second term. But there was, in fact, one rather unpleasant moment. A British journalist asked Trump at a joint press conference with Keir Starmer, saying, "Your Vice President Vance previously stated that there are problems with freedom of speech in Britain, but you fired the popular TV host Jimmy Kimmel." Let me explain here. Jimmy Kimmel is truly a super popular TV host who, for over 20 years here in the United States, has hosted his own comedy show, or rather used to host it, because he was fired for making a joke about Donald Trump. In fact, even the president himself doesn't hide the fact that Kimmel only spoke badly about him, and of course he didn't like that. So, about which particular joke got Kimmel fired and why the Pentagon is now monitoring employees' social media here, I suggest we take a look at the report we've prepared. The Jimmy Kimmel Theater is closed. The show, which used to draw audiences both live in the studio and in front of their TV screens, has been shut down. And in one of the last episodes, Kimmel made ironic remarks about how Republicans are trying to pretend that the suspect in the murder of popular blogger Charlie Kirk is not one of their supporters, even though he grew up in a family with MAGA views. He especially mocked the way the President of the United States himself is mourning Kirk's death, calling him his friend. In Los Angeles and New York, Kimmel's supporters gathered for rallies. He became the second comedian to lose his job for mocking Trump. A little earlier, the show of another popular TV host, Stephen Colbert, was cancelled. Both were fierce critics of the current president.
What happened isn't just about one guy losing his show. The government is testing how far it can go with censorship. And you know what? When they see that it works, when they see that the networks give in, they won't stop. That will never happen. First Colbert, then Kimmel. What's next? Are we going to cancel Sesame Street because Big Bird believes in climate change?
Attorney General Pam Bondi stated, "This isn't about censorship, it's about fighting hate speech." Vice President J.D. Vance joked in a post on X that Kimmel's show will now be hosted by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, a reference to the fact that Rubio previously received the additional role of National Security Advisor after Michael Wolff's was dismissed. Donald Trump himself did not hide his satisfaction over the firing of the TV hosts he had long disliked. He even commented on it in the presence of UK Prime Minister Starmer at their joint press conference.
Jimmy Kimmel was fired because he had bad ratings. And he also said terrible things about the great gentleman known as Charlie Kirk, and Jimmy Kimmel himself is not a talented person. He had very bad ratings. He should have been fired a long time ago. So, you can call it freedom of speech or not. He was fired because he lacked talent.
Earlier, Defense Minister Pete Hegseth publicly stated that his department would monitor social media and private statements made by employees. According to American media, several employees were suspended from work there for criticizing the now deceased blogger Charlie Kirk. From the United States, Olga, Koshelenko, Maxim Shinkarenko, TSN 1+1 Marathon United News.